My name is Carol. I'm 66 years old, and 18 months ago, I moved to the Philippines with what I thought was a bulletproof retirement budget. $3,500 a month between my pension and my late husband's Social Security survivor benefit. Every calculator, every forum post, every video I'd watched told me that number was more than enough to live comfortably out here. 6 months in, I was staring at a bank statement, wondering how I'd burn through nearly $11,000 faster than I'd planned to spend in almost a full year. This is the story of the 5 costs nobody warned me about, and what I had to change to actually make this work. My husband Gerald passed in 2023, a heart attack, sudden, no warning at all. After 39 years of marriage, I found myself alone in our house outside Tucson, Arizona, with a pension of $1,900 a month from my years as a school administrator, and his Social Security survivor benefit adding another $1,600 on top of that. $3,500 a month, reliable, guaranteed, indexed for inflation. I did what a lot of you watching this probably did. I spent 4 months researching retiring abroad, and the Philippines kept coming up as one of the most affordable, English-friendly options out there. I read the forums. I watched the videos. Everyone said the same thing. A comfortable life for $1,000 to $1,500 a month, sometimes less. With $3,500 coming in every single month, I thought I wasn't just going to get by out here. I thought I was going to live like a queen. I sold the house in Tucson for $340,000, paid off what remained of the mortgage, and moved that money into a savings account back home as a cushion. I picked a mid-sized city. I won't say exactly which one, just to keep some privacy, somewhere with good hospitals, an international airport within reach, and a decent-sized expat community. I rented a 2-bedroom condo for $450 a month, fully furnished, and by every spreadsheet I'd built, I was going to be saving over $2,000 a month out here. That is not remotely what happened. The first hit came in month 2, and it came from somewhere I genuinely thought I'd already handled. Before I left Arizona, I bought what a broker sold me as International Retiree Health Insurance for $140 a month. It sounded comprehensive. It had a nice glossy brochure. What I didn't understand, because nobody explained it to me clearly, and I didn't ask the right questions, was that the policy had a $5,000 deductible per incident, excluded almost anything related to a pre-existing condition, and required pre-authorization for anything beyond a basic clinic visit, which in an emergency is close to useless. In my second month here, I had a gallbladder attack in the middle of the night. Real pain, the kind that has you doubled over on the bathroom floor. I ended up at a private hospital, because the public hospital had a 4-hour wait just to be seen, and by the time I was discharged 3 days later, after surgery to remove the gallbladder, the bill came to just over $4,200. My insurance covered $310 of it. $310 out of a $5,000 deductible I hadn't understood I had, on a policy I'd been paying $140 a month for. I paid the rest out of my Arizona savings cushion, the one I'd told myself was untouchable, meant only for real emergencies back home, not month-to-month medical bills abroad. I want to be very clear about what I did wrong here, because I think it's the single most useful thing I can pass on to you. I bought insurance based on the monthly premium being affordable, without reading the actual coverage details, the deductibles, the exclusions, or asking what the claims process actually looked like in a real emergency. I've since switched to a different provider that costs $210 a month, but has a $500 deductible and covers pre-existing conditions after a 12-month waiting period. And I've had 2 friends here independently verify that their claims actually got paid promptly. It costs more monthly. It has already saved me thousands. The second cost that blindsided me was the Survey retirement visa itself. Not the ongoing cost, but the setup cost, which I'd badly underestimated. I'd read that the SARV required a deposit of $10,000 to $20,000 depending on your age and pension, which I'd budgeted for out of my house sale proceeds. What I hadn't budgeted for was the actual processing costs, the medical exam requirements, the police clearance from back home that had to be apostilled, the courier fees to send documents back and forth. The agent I ended up hiring for $900 because the paperwork was more complicated than I could manage alone, and then almost 4 months living on a simple tourist visa while the SARV processed, which meant visa extension fees every 60 days, plus 1 required trip out of the country and back in the meantime, which ran me another $600 for flights and a hotel in Hong Kong for 3 nights. All told, what I thought would cost roughly $12,000 for the SARV ended up costing just under $16,000 by the time everything was said and done. It's not a monthly cost, thankfully. It's a one-time cost. But it hit right in the same window as the gallbladder surgery. And between the two of them, month 3 and 4 completely gutted the cushion I thought I had. The third cost took me longer to notice because it wasn't one big bill. It was death by 1,000 small cuts. I noticed, slowly, that I seemed to be paying more than my Filipino neighbors for almost everything. Taxi fares before I learned to use ride-hailing apps instead, produce at the smaller markets before I started shopping with a Filipino friend who negotiated for both of us, even a paint job I had done on a rental car I was leasing, which came in nearly double what my friend Linda, a local retiree I'd befriended, told me she'd have paid for the identical job. This isn't universal, and I don't want to make it sound like everyone here is trying to take advantage of foreigners, because that's not been my overall experience at all. But there's a real, well-documented pattern where prices quietly adjust upward the moment a vendor clocks you as a foreign retiree with a fixed dollar income, especially if you don't speak any of the local language and don't have a local contact helping you navigate transactions. Over the first 6 months, I estimated this foreigner premium cost me somewhere between $80 and $150 a month in small overpayments I never would have noticed individually, spread across groceries, transportation, minor repairs, and services. It doesn't sound like much line by line, but stacked up over 6 months, it was closer to $700 I'd simply handed over without realizing it. The fourth cost was one I understood intellectually before I moved, but grossly underestimated emotionally. I told myself I'd fly home once a year, budgeted at around $1,100 round trip. What actually happened was that in my first 18 months here, I flew back to Arizona 3 separate times. Once when my sister had a minor stroke and I panicked and booked the first flight I could find for $1,800. Once for my granddaughter's high school graduation that I simply couldn't bring myself to miss. And once just because, around month 10, the loneliness got bad enough after Gerald's passing that I needed to sit in my sister's kitchen and cry with somebody who'd known me my entire life. 3 trips instead of 1, at an average of nearly $1,400 each once you account for the last-minute booking on the stroke trip, came to just over $4,200 in flights alone in a year and a half, against a budget that had allowed for $1,100. The fifth cost, and honestly the one that surprised me most, was the cost of not fully letting go of my old life while building this new one. I kept a storage unit back in Tucson at $95 a month, telling myself I wasn't ready to get rid of Gerald's things yet. I kept my old US phone plan active for almost a year at $65 a month, so I'd have a backup number, which in hindsight, I never once actually needed. I kept renewing a small life insurance policy at $110 a month that had made sense when Gerald and I both had it jointly, but which no longer made financial sense for me alone at $66, something a fee-only financial planner back home finally pointed out to me on a call I probably should have made 8 months earlier than I did. None of these were dramatic individually. Together, they added up to nearly $207 a month I was spending, to maintain a version of my old American life I wasn't actually using, purely out of a kind of emotional inertia I hadn't examined closely enough before I left. By month 7, I sat down and did real math for the first time since arriving, instead of just watching numbers disappear and hoping it would sort itself out. Between the insurance shortfall, the visa overrun, the foreigner premium, the extra flights, and the 2 lives maintenance costs, I calculated I'd gone through just over $23,000 beyond my planned budget in 7 months. On a fixed income of $3,500 a month, that gap had come entirely out of the Tucson house sale proceeds I'd meant to preserve as an untouchable emergency fund. I remember sitting there with the calculator, genuinely frightened for the first time since Gerald died, doing the math on how many more months I could bleed at that rate before the fund that was supposed to last 20 years ran dry in 5. I want to walk you through exactly what I changed, because I think the fixes matter far more than the mistakes. Anyone can tell you they overspent or underestimated costs, but that doesn't actually help unless you know what they did afterward to solve the problem. The good news is that almost every issue I ran into had a practical solution. None of them were glamorous, and a few of them forced me to admit that I had been stubborn or overly optimistic, but together, they completely changed my financial situation. The first thing I tackled was my health insurance. As I mentioned earlier, I switched providers, even though it meant paying a noticeably higher monthly premium. At first, that felt like admitting defeat. I had convinced myself I was saving money with the cheaper plan, but a policy is only a bargain if it actually protects you when something goes wrong. After reading every page of the policy, instead of just comparing prices, I realized the cheaper plan was filled with exclusions, high deductibles, and reimbursement rules that would have left me paying thousands out of pocket during a serious emergency. The new provider wasn't the cheapest option, but it was transparent. I knew exactly what was covered, how claims worked, and what hospitals accepted it. The extra monthly cost bought me something I hadn't realized I was missing: peace of mind. I stopped worrying every time I caught a cold or thought about what would happen if I needed surgery overseas. The second change was hiring a proper fee-only financial advisor back in the United States. For years, I thought I could handle everything myself. After all, there are thousands of YouTube videos, retirement calculators, investment forums, and budgeting apps promising to replace professional advice. But there's a big difference between information and personalized guidance. Instead of trying to piece together advice from strangers online, I found an advisor who charges me $400 a quarter. Twice a year, we review my entire financial picture: my retirement accounts, taxes, investment allocations, emergency fund, healthcare expenses, travel costs, and long-term withdrawal strategy. That one relationship has probably saved me thousands of dollars already, simply by helping me avoid expensive mistakes. More importantly, it lets me sleep at night knowing someone is checking my blind spots, instead of me hoping I haven't overlooked something important. Next came one of the hardest emotional decisions: closing my storage unit back in the States. Financially, it was obvious. Emotionally, it felt like cutting one of the last ties to my previous life. Every month I paid that storage bill because I kept telling myself I'd come back for everything eventually. The reality was that I hadn't opened most of those boxes in years. When I finally forced myself to go through an inventory with my sister, I realized there were only a handful of items that truly mattered. Gerald's watch came to me. A small box of family photographs came with it. A few personal documents were worth keeping. Everything else, old furniture, kitchen appliances, boxes of clothes, random decorations, things I'd completely forgotten I owned, was simply taking up space while draining money from my account every single month. We donated almost all of it to a veterans charity that Gerald would have genuinely appreciated. Closing that storage unit wasn't just about saving money. It felt like finally accepting that I wasn't halfway between two lives anymore. I had chosen one. Then I started looking for all the little recurring expenses that had quietly followed me overseas. Those are the subscriptions and automatic payments people rarely notice, because they're relatively small on their own. I canceled my redundant US phone plan after realizing I was barely using it. I replaced it with a much cheaper option that still let me keep my number for banking and two-factor authentication. I also canceled an outdated life insurance policy that no longer fit my financial situation. Combined, those two decisions immediately freed up almost $207 every month. That's over $3,000 a year from changes that took less than an afternoon to make. It reminded me that financial leaks are often boring rather than dramatic. They don't show up as one giant mistake. They show up as dozens of tiny payments you stop questioning. One of the most surprising improvements came from something that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or investing. My friend Linda started taking me grocery shopping and to local markets. At first, I didn't think it would make much difference. But she taught me basic phrases in the local language, showed me which vendors were known for fair prices, explained which neighborhoods charged tourist rates, and pointed out when I was unknowingly paying the foreigner premium. Before that, I would simply accept the first price I was quoted, because I assumed everything was already inexpensive compared to back home. Over time, I realized those small differences added up. Learning a few polite greetings, understanding local pricing, and shopping where residents actually shop gradually reduced my grocery bill and day-to-day spending without making me feel like I was sacrificing anything. More importantly, I stopped feeling like an outsider every time I bought vegetables or household supplies. I became part of the routine instead of just passing through it. The biggest budgeting change, though, involved travel. My original spreadsheet assumed I would fly back to the United States once a year. On paper, that looked perfectly reasonable. In reality, life doesn't happen on spreadsheets. Family birthdays, unexpected illnesses, weddings, funerals, holidays you suddenly become nostalgic for. All of those things have a way of changing your priorities. During my first year abroad, I realized pretending I'd only ever need one trip home was simply setting myself up to fail. So I rebuilt my budget around reality instead of optimism. I now set aside enough money for approximately $2,400 a year in travel expenses, assuming 2 trips home instead of 1. Some years I may spend less. Other years I might spend more. But at least now the money is waiting for me, instead of becoming an emergency expense every time I need to book a flight. I also created something I had never really maintained before, a true miscellaneous category. Before moving, every unexpected expense felt like a surprise. A broken appliance, visa paperwork, replacing a laptop charger, renewing documents, buying gifts for family back home. None of these were technically emergencies, yet they constantly threw off my budget because I hadn't planned for normal life to keep happening. Now there's a dedicated amount set aside every month for those inevitable costs. If I don't spend it, it rolls over. If I do need it, I'm not pulling money from my emergency fund or investments. Another lesson was learning to distinguish between temporary expenses and permanent ones. During those first several months abroad, I kept assuming every unusually high bill represented my new normal. In reality, many of those costs happened only once: visa applications, furnishing the condo, setting up utilities, replacing household items I couldn't bring with me, opening local bank accounts, paying deposits, and countless administrative fees. Once those settled down, my actual day-to-day life became much more predictable than those chaotic first months suggested. Looking back, I wish I had separated my moving costs from my living costs right from the beginning. It would have given me a much clearer picture of what retirement abroad actually costs once you're established. 18 months in, my actual monthly spending has settled at just under $1,650. That's with everything included. Not just rent and groceries, but realistic health insurance, transportation, utilities, entertainment, regular household expenses, and a travel fund spread across all 12 months of the year. Nothing is hidden anymore. Nothing is conveniently ignored because it doesn't fit the narrative. It's an honest budget, based on real receipts, rather than hopeful estimates. On my $3,500 monthly retirement income, that leaves me genuinely saving close to $1,550 every single month. Ironically, that's almost exactly what many of those YouTube videos and retirement forums had promised from the beginning. The difference wasn't that they were lying, it was that they were describing life after the adjustment period, while I assumed those numbers would be true on day one. It took me 7 expensive months of trial and error, a handful of painful mistakes, and several uncomfortable conversations with myself before my finances finally matched the lifestyle everyone else seemed to be enjoying. If you're planning the same move, I'm not telling you not to do it. In fact, even after every unexpected expense, every budgeting mistake, every frustrating insurance claim, and every overpriced purchase I made during those first months, I still believe this was the right decision for me. I wake up happier than I did before. My stress levels are lower. My daily routine feels healthier. I have more time, a slower pace of life, and a stronger appreciation for experiences instead of possessions. None of that came for free, but for me, it has absolutely been worth the price of admission. What I am telling you is this: build your budget assuming you know nothing yet. Because you don't. No matter how many Facebook groups you've joined, retirement blogs you've bookmarked, spreadsheets you've perfected, or YouTube channels you've binge-watched, experience always costs more than theory. Add a genuine buffer for health insurance and read every page of the policy before you buy it. Budget for the visa process costing at least 50% more than the headline number because unexpected fees have an incredible way of appearing. Assume you'll fly home more often than you think you will, especially during that emotional first year when everything still feels unfamiliar. Give yourself room for setup costs, unexpected paperwork, and the little purchases nobody mentions because they're too boring to include in travel videos. Most importantly, before you board that plane, sit down with your bank statements and honestly ask yourself what pieces of your old life you're still quietly paying to maintain. Are you keeping a storage unit because you haven't let go yet? Paying for subscriptions you no longer use? Holding on to insurance policies that no longer make sense? Keeping memberships, phone plans, or services simply because canceling them feels like admitting you're not coming back? Sometimes, the biggest financial improvements don't come from spending less in your new country. They come from finally stopping the spending that belongs to your old one. If this story helped you avoid even one mistake that I had to learn the hard way, let me know down in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear what stage you're at in your own retirement or relocation journey, and whether you've run into any surprises of your own. And if you'd like to know the exact insurance provider I switched to, the fee-only financial advisor I hired, and see every single category in my current monthly budget, including what I spend on groceries, utilities, travel, healthcare, dining out, and entertainment, stick around. Next week, I'm opening up my entire retirement spreadsheet, line by line, and showing you the real numbers behind what it actually costs me to live here today.